Hi everyone, I'm Courtney McGrath from the Ability Co-op. Here with me today is Sinead Burke, who is one of the leaders of the Printing House Square Leaders Project. As the Disability Service transitions to Printing House Square, there will be rooms named after disabled Trinity graduates that have shown great examples of leadership and activism. So Sinead, thank you for being here with me today.
This is such a treat. What a ridiculous introduction and what a ridiculous project to be able to be part of. I am incredibly honoured, and I don't think my brothers and sisters will believe this. A, that I graduated from Trinity, and B, that this is something that I get to be part of. They'll think you mean another Sinead Burke, so hopefully you don't. Fingers crossed I'm the right one.
And tell us, Sinead, how was your time in Trinity?
It was unpredictable in the sense that my degree was a Bachelor of Education. So I studied primarily in Marino Institute of Education, but one day a week we would go to Trinity for lectures. So it was this incredible experience of duality almost, that from Tuesday to Friday, I was in these classes of 30 people, and often our rooms where we studied looked like primary school classrooms. They were modeled to look like the places that we would then begin teaching in, to then go to Trinity once a week where we had 3 lectures. And it was this vast campus of thousands of people, and many probably more diverse than teaching, because that's just the way it happens and exists. And it was this entirely alien experience in comparison to my Tuesday to Friday experience, because our lecture halls were just unimaginably big. There was a long walk across campus, but you also got exposed to what I had imagined college life would be like from all of the content that I had consumed, particularly from the States. It was kind of like how I imagined Elle Woods was in Harvard when she went in Legally Blonde. So it was this wonderful experience. But I think what really helped create a uniformity in my experience between those two places was the disability services. I think I went there in the days even before I went to college, trying to map out what it was that I needed. And I think coming at it from an individual perspective was so helpful, because all of our needs are different, whether we are disabled or non-disabled. And being able to be prepared within that gave me skills for agency, because I imagine, like many people who are disabled, I had come through the primary and the secondary school systems with greater support, whether that was with special needs assistants or with teachers who understood what it was that I required to be able to survive and thrive academically. So then moving into this college space where it was such an unknown but nerve-wracking. So to be able to have some sort of solid ground, and for Trinity and Marino to be able to provide that, I think gave me a college experience that I'm really proud of, but also got to grow as a person, which is an ironic thing for a little person and a person with dwarfism to be able to say, but I grew proverbially in myself and really got to explore what I cared about, and I think was really the beginning of my journey as an advocate.
And you mentioned that you went to Marino and Trinity. How did you find navigating college in terms of accessibility and inclusion as a student with a disability?
It was funny. I always knew that I wanted to be a primary school teacher. And I think I decided on my own very first day of primary school. I loved the notion of education being a catalyst, and that the classroom was this microcosm for the world. And you could have conversations, shape children's minds, encourage them to do and be anything in a way that challenged the status quo. And for me, it was kind of accessibility that made me decide which college it was that I wanted to go to. You know, on the open day, which is traditional in sixth year, I went to all colleges that provided a course like this. And I had heard from all of my own teachers, oh, you should go to this place, or you should go to this place. And I remember my first experience in Marino. They have a space that's called the Hourclin, which is the Irish word kind of for like a theatre or an auditorium. And it was a new part of the building. And I remember going in there and realizing I could reach the light switch, because it had been designed to accessibility standards. And I remember turning to my mother is non-disabled, and saying to her, I can turn the light switches on. And it wasn't necessarily that I could turn the light switches on, but the symbolism that I would never be left in the dark. And that almost became a metaphor. And it was unlikely, and it never happened in my 4 years of being in Marino, that I was in that room on my own. But it was this invitation for inclusion, right? That I knew that in this space I could manage. And Marino had a swipe card system, that most of the doors that you had to enter into, you had to swipe card to gain access. And I remember before even starting, having a conversation with them about would it be possible to lower them down, and having that awkward disability conversation that we often have, like, oh, I'm so sorry, would you be able to accommodate for my human rights, please? And that not even being a question I had to ask. It was already something that they were prepared to do. And I remember thinking, you know, my inclusion here isn't negotiable. It was just accepted and confirmed and pre-planned before it even existed. So in many ways, my CAO form, it made sense that I had one choice. I had CM001, the only choice that I had in my CAO form, and everybody else was very concerned that I might have to figure out a different option. But it was what I wanted to do. And then I went to college and I went there, and it was just the most wonderful experience. And for having that accessibility experience and mirrored in my time in Trinity was just wonderful, because I think the only thing that we want as disabled people and as people is equity, right? And that's different to equality. We don't want what everybody else has. We want the resources that allows us to be able to experience things in the same way as everybody else. And equity is what I received in both of those places. There were times, of course, when you had to fight for it and challenge it. I'm not saying that the experience was seamless in every day, but what there was a partnership, which I think makes everything easier.
Yeah, no, I think it's great that they were, you know, obviously willing to like lower the cards and stuff, like, and I think it would be ridiculous if they were like, no, do you know, but
No,
there is,
but
yeah.
I think we all experience moments in our day-to-day life where that thinking isn't even considered. It's funny, I have been back to Marino this year lecturing. So on a lot of the bathroom doors, there are two handles. There's a high handle and a low handle. And I kind of consider my legacy in Marino that those things still exist.
That's great.
So I still get to go to those places kind of as a lecturer and be a participant in it. But for me, it's like, you know, it's not just about accessibility for me as one person, but who now gets to traipse through that college and that space on an open day and think, oh gosh, they have thought of me or somebody like me, or how many children get to go into that place as parents of any of the students or of any of the staff and can now use the bathroom independently because they were accommodating for me. And I think it's realizing that accessibility is universal design, that if we are designing for a minority community, there is always an advantage for the majority. So yeah, I think if I have any legacy in that space, it is building spaces for more and more people for generations to come.
Yeah, like I hope in Trinity there will be the same. Like I haven't seen any like lowered handles or lowered sinks or really many of that. So hopefully, like, especially when, you know, the disability service moves to Prince Nice Square, you'd hope that like all them things are in place so that people can use them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we need for everybody, right? We need this to not be a rarity, but something that we just consider the starting point for all conversations around design. And I think it's about mirroring or between the aesthetic of beauty and functionality for everyone. And it's a harmony that we need to increasingly meet.
Yeah, exactly. This is a bit of a jump of a question, but apart from you know, your college experience, you have been very involved in fashion, and you were the first little person to be at the Met Gala, and you also appeared at British Vogue. How did you find both experiences, and have you found that the fashion industry is making positive steps to becoming more inclusive to all body types?
I think my interest in fashion came about because I was disabled. I think if I wasn't disabled, I would have little, but definitely less interest in fashion because it would be easy, right? I think my interest in fashion was rooted in feeling excluded, was rooted in the tangible understanding that if I wore a certain item, people would have a changed opinion of who I was or what I could do based on being a low person. So for example, if I was in a supermarket in a cape, right, all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's not a child. Or if I was there in a tuxedo, they're going, oh, she's a professional. And yet, despite understanding the language of fashion and its ability to communicate my personality and my expertise to the world, I couldn't buy or access those garments or couldn't see myself in any campaigns or magazines. And I never had a vision that I would be able to participate or be able to, you know, sit with you in Zoom and say, I now work in the fashion industry, which again is an absurd sentence for me to be able to say. But it came about over a decade, right? It didn't happen overnight. And I think when we look at the changes that are needed to be made in fashion, for me, I teeter on this boundary of realizing that any change that is made reactionary, particularly to a moment that we're living in right now as regards to the global advocacy and inequalities that exist, so much of those changes will only be made in order to comfort the public opinion. Does that make sense? It's not systemic change if it just happens right away. So I teeter on this balance of understanding that systemic change takes time, because this industry has existed in, based on an exclusive subscription model since time immemorial. So actually, if we're going to change that, we need to change the structure in and of itself. We need to change the culture. We need to change the leadership. We also need to provide a pathway for new generations of more diverse talent to come into this organization. And that takes time. So I kind of sit on this boundary of not wanting it to happen right away because I know it won't last, but also needing it to happen far sooner than it's currently happening. And I think there have been some brilliant symbols of progress, but I think what we need next is to move beyond visibility being a solution, or visibility being something that we are satisfied by as regards to inclusion, because I think it's really important that we have more people with disabilities, more people of color, more Black people, more trans representation within campaigns. But until those individuals are also the directors, the creative directors, until they are the CEOs, and until they are the heads of marketing, we are still narrating a story that has been scripted by somebody else, often through a biased lens. And that bias might not be intentional, but exists because we live in a biased world, because it was designed by people who are not us. So I think until we really move to that space of nothing about us without us through an intersectional lens, there isn't going to be equity. And that is going to take real time. But I'm hoping that what we see within the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States in particular, that really creates a proliferation of new voices, and that there is this understanding that we cannot go back. This notion of the new normal, I don't think we should be using that rhetoric. It's just new, because normal worked for so few people in the past, that actually what we need is a completely different definition of what the future is going to be, and redesigning it with people who didn't get to be in the room before, based on what it is that they need to achieve through true equity. But I'm hoping that what we do is ensure that we center and we amplify Black voices, but we also take that amplification through an intersectional lens, because if we do have an opportunity within this moment to redesign spaces and places in a visible and invisible way, let's do it for everyone. Because if we don't, what do we have to wait for in order to get equality for trans people, or for disabled people, or for poorer people? Do we have to wait for an atrocious crime to happen to somebody from them communities in order to have empathy? So now we have an opportunity to rebuild spaces for everyone. So why not? Particularly when, looking at it through a capitalist lens, there is an opportunity for profitability, there's an opportunity for innovation, there's an opportunity for creativity. I can see so few reasons why we don't uphold people's human rights through design right now. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right when saying, like, does something awful have to happen for people to then realize, oh, this is an important issue? Like, I feel like there's also lots going on with Black Lives Matter, and then since everybody's like at home and the world is kind of like a halt, people are seeing everything online, and now they're like, oh, this is big issues, but like these issues have already existed, and they shouldn't be like forgotten, or it shouldn't be up to the next crisis that people start caring about things. So I think it is really important that all body types should be able to wear what they want, and there should be fashion designers creating clothes for these people. I just think it is such an opportunity, like you're saying, in in a business capitalist way, that there is opportunity there.
And I think it's a challenge. I have spent a lot of my advocacy journey in fashion working within the luxury sector, which is positive in one way, because those brands and those companies have resources by which to make changes, by which to be more inclusive, by which to support other people's careers. But then you're creating products and items that might be at a price point that alienate the exact type of customer that you are trying to support and include, right? And what can they afford? Perhaps a fragrance or a lipstick, but does that matter if a dress is, or a pair of trousers is at their price point? But then what you hope is that by working within the luxury sector, that you create accessibility as something that is luxury, and that will then influence companies and organizations that are a more accessible price point in terms of finance for people to then engage with. Because if you position yourself within a more fast fashion market, which is at a price point that perhaps more people can afford, who are you oppressing by trying to include others? Like, are you then saying, okay, well, it's okay that people who created these garments are not on a fair living wage, once people who are more or less marginalized are able to afford and be included. And I think fashion is an ecosystem that is problematic in so many ways, that we need to find a way in which creates access, doesn't create further exclusion for other people too. And what is the most sustainable, equal, human rights-based model that we can include people? And I'm not sure there is one just yet, but that shouldn't mean that we don't try something at all, because what we can't do is just continue to proliferate this movement where we exclude people. It's not fair, and that sounds childish and trite, but that's the reality it's all rooted in, right? It's that notion of justice.
Yeah, no, it's not fair. And hopefully like there will be more conversations about it. And so this actually leads me to my next question. One, I listened to your last podcast with the creative director of Gucci, so that was brilliant. And so your podcast, As Me with Sinead, you have had conversations with celebrities that are so natural and honest, and you get a real insight on what it's like to be them. How have you found the podcast so far, and what have you learned from it?
It's been wonderful and nerve-wracking, and I've got to see parts of the world I couldn't have imagined, and I've got to irritate so many of my heroes with questions that I can't believe they answer and can't believe how they answer them. I think a podcast is such a wonderful medium because it is, in reality, a conversation between two people. And the best of those episodes are when you forget there's going to be an audience who will listen to it, much like this. And it is where, from an audience's perspective, you're kind of like a fly on the wall, listening into this intimate conversation between two people, and you don't know where it is going to go. For me, in terms of my preparation for those conversations, I did that podcast with a company in the US called Lemonada Media, and we had kind of 4 questions that every interview was built on. How do you describe yourself personally and professionally? Which was the first question I always asked in my old blog posts when I had a blog. And then the second question is, what is it like to live in your body? And it's always interesting how different people answer that, whether they are disabled or non-disabled or queer or older, because everybody lives in their body differently. And what are the moments that have changed you, and what gives you hope? And apart from those 4 questions, it was my job to listen. And as a naturally curious person, which is a kind way of saying that I'm deeply nosy, I just want to know how people tick, how their minds work, how their bodies work, how they think about themselves and the world. So it was kind of a natural habitat that I got to sit in and just listen to people telling me about themselves. And it was such a nice treat to not have to talk about myself, because as a Virgo and as a narcissist in some ways, I sit in that role quite comfortably too. But it was really lovely to be able to be a facilitator of other people's stories, because again, going back to how the world has worked, we as disabled people have rarely had an opportunity to tell our own stories in our own world without some framing of either inspiration or motivation or empowerment for others, but just getting to be ourselves. So it was a real gift and a joy to be able to, and ensuring the podcast was accessible and transcribing every episode was something that was really important to us as a show. And I just couldn't believe every week the people who said yes. I just every week was surprised when we asked somebody to participate in the show, that when they said yes, I was like, are you sure? It's my show and it's just me. And they were like, yes. So getting to talk with people like Dan Levy or Riz Ahmed or Lonnie Bunch, who's now the secretary of the Smithsonian, it was just such an education for me, getting to learn about different parts of life and the world. And all of my biases were exposed and challenged, and I evolved as a person because of each conversation. I came away thinking about the world differently after each conversation, and that in itself was the gift. If anybody listened to it, was only a further success, but kind of the definition of success for me was coming away from every conversation thinking about the world differently and thinking about that person differently. So it was really thrilling.
Yeah, no, that is great, because we in the Ability Co-op, we're hopefully trying to do a podcast, and we want to do people's stories and what their lives has been like as a person with a disability. And we feel that kind of format, the way that you were able to have such a natural conversation, and it just flowed really well. So like hopefully in the future the Ability Co-op will be able to do a podcast and learn from
Well, I'm
ours.
going to be the first person to subscribe. So now that you've said it, it needs to exist because I need to listen to that podcast.
Just manifested it into the universe now.
Exactly, dead right.
Yeah. Also in October 2020, you have a book called Breaking the Mold coming out. What has inspired you to write this book, and what is the key message?
What has inspired me to write the book? Being really transparent, the pandemic. So I began writing that book at the beginning of COVID-19. And I think for me as a teacher and as an educator and as somebody who is interested in visibility and storytelling, you know, I imagine much like yourself, I grew up in a world where when I went to the library or if I went to the bookshop or if I looked at even the library in my classroom, either as a teacher or as a student, so few of the protagonists reflected my experience or looked like me as a visibly and physically disabled woman. And the stories that did exist were not told by disabled people. Not that that makes them less, but it does make the narration different. And I just thought, you know what, I should have some time now. I'm at home. See if it's possible to write this book. And it came about quite quickly. I was thinking initially it might be available to the world next year, and then it is available to the world very soon. And for me, I think, you know, my parents founded Little People of Ireland in 1997 and have cultivated and created this amazing community for little people and their families. And so much of what I hear from those friends and those parents is that so often they live in a world that tells them they need to change, right? It's looking at disability from a social and a human rights model, that our disability is rooted in living in a world that was not designed and built for us, both in its physicality and within its culture. And the themes of the book is just telling people that, you know, you don't have to change for the world should change for you, and you are enough as you are. And it is right that you should dream of the impossible. It is acceptable that you should believe that you can do anything, because you can. You may have to do it a different way, but the impossible is not impossible just because you're different. And I think its primary theme is realizing that, you know, we're all different, that my disability is visible. And in many ways, I think that is a privilege, right? Because I walk into a room and people can predict what it is that I need or require in order to have an accessible space. But we all have challenges. My greatest challenges might not actually be my dwarfism. It could be something that I'm struggling with. It could be a personal or a family situation. But we all wear this mask where we perceive everybody as living a normal life, whatever that means. And the notion of the book is realizing that what makes us the same is that we're all different. And actually there is a pride in being different, because that difference equips you with skills, it equips you with a perspective that is individual and unique. But this notion that it's only me and you that's different and everybody else is the same is bizarre and wrong, but we just don't talk about those differences, or we expect people whose differences are more obvious to narrate those experiences over others. So it's trying to create kind of a community of acceptance and of pride. And yeah, it's something that I have been working on in a bubble with editors and with a publishing company, kind of in isolation, literally in isolation, for several months. And the idea that it's going to be on the shelves and available for people to read. And I think what would best is if one child believes in themselves more because of it, then that's my job done, in a sense. Because this was a book that I wanted to exist when I was a child. This is a book that I needed to exist when I was a teacher, because I wanted my students to believe that they were enough as they are.
Yeah, no, I think like I have the book like pre-saved on eSINs already. And no, like I'm so excited to read it. And I feel like, especially like, you know, if there was any representation of when I was like in school and stuff about like having hearing loss, or there was, you know, shows in television where people had like cochlear implants or hearing aids, I probably would have felt, you know, a tiny bit less different, and would have felt a bit more, you know, this is completely normal, I'm not the only one, you know. So
it exist. And it's those things. Like, it's been really interesting. My book goes to print in the coming days, which is really terrifying because I can't do anything more to it. Like, it's done, and we have kind of finished up the illustrations, and it's been interesting because we've had all of these conversations. So in the book I talk about deaf in terms of capital letter G, small letter G. With my editors, they're going, I'm not sure I've seen that before. What is it? And I'm like, well, it's capital letter G if your first language is sign language, it's small letter D if you're hard of hearing and English is your first language. And they're like, gosh, what are the nuances of this? And again, it's about making people feel included. And, perhaps that is a new conversation to publishing, because they haven't had many people writing these stories from these perspectives before. And that inclusion is important, right? It was really important to me that we had a character illustrated on our cover who has a cochlear implant. It was really important that we had somebody with a support dog. It was really, and we have a reflection of mostly visible disabilities, because that's what you can reflect in cover. But we have made a real effort to ensure that the writing speaks to those differences that are less visible and more invisible, and just trying to include people, because it's kind of that Audre Lorde quote, until we're all free, none of us are free. And it's trying to speak to as many different people as possible without speaking for them, but in turn amplifying their voice. So I can only speak of my own experience, but what I've tried to do in this book is leverage my experience to try to mirror or point to the experiences of others and help them feel seen and heard. So fingers crossed, you can send me the most terrible review once you read it and order it, and I'll be like, great, thank you, it was terrible, thank you so much.
I'm so excited to read it now. I'm so excited, especially that you said there's about the deaf section. Like, I'm very excited. I can't wait. And I love
even
the
be illustrations of a sign language. There might even be that. Who knows? My publishers are going to murder me. I know nothing. I've said too much.
So Sinead, you have achieved so much since your time in Trinity. You have, even though you're making a face that you seem like you're not, you have. And what is next for you?
I'd love to buy a house. And I come to that from a really kind of, I'm not sure if you can hear my dog groaning in the corner because it's raining outside and she wants to go outside, and I'm like, you'll be back in 30 seconds. So my apologies for that oral interlude. But I think for lots of disabled people, the notion of agency is something that we are really challenged by. So I am very lucky to be able to live in my family home. But if I was being really transparent, the reason why I live in my family home is because I can't really rent, right? I can't rent a property where I can't reach the light switches, or can't reach the oven or the cooker, or even more importantly, can't reach the lock on the whole door, right? Because how do I get in or out? And how do I get out if there's a fire, right? So no landlord is legally obliged to make those alterations for me to take a 12-month lease. So what is next for me, I hope, is like independence, because I get to be independent in so many ways. But what I would really like is to have a place of my own where I don't have to drag a footstool to reach something. And I'm lucky that I get to do that in my own family home, but where maybe things are designed for me. Does that make sense? And I get the power to be able to choose how those things are designed. And it might be really ugly and really terrible in terms of my taste, not in terms of accessibility. But I'm looking forward to hopefully in the near future being able to get to make decisions like that, where I have a place and space of my own that is where I don't have to change myself in order to fit into it. It's already designed for me. So that's what I'm really looking forward to, hopefully sometime in the future. So that's quite a personal thing. A professional thing that I'm looking forward to in the future is I'm unsure. I have spent a year where I envisioned and imagined a huge amount of travel, which was usually my modus operandi prior to a global. I can doesn't work. So I am really looking forward to seeing how that evolves. But I don't know, what would I like to do if anything was possible? I'm not sure. I would like to kind of evolve the work that I did with a podcast, maybe in a TV or video format. I would like to maybe write another book, because I enjoyed that process, even though it was at breakneck speed. And I don't know. I think the house is my big dream. Living in a place that is my own is where I can get like electricity bills in my name. That's like really exciting to me, because I'm getting old and I'm like, oh yes, please. That is my idea of fun.
Yeah, send me all them bills. Like
like the first round of bills, it will get really boring and dull. Like I just want the first edition of the ones, and then like month 2 I'll be like, oh no, you can keep these. Please put them in a different name. Thank you so much.
And Sinead, what advice or words of encouragement would you have for students with disabilities who may feel discouraged that they will succeed outside of college because of their disability?
I think surrounding yourself with good people. And I don't mean people who will tell you that the world is perfect and that you can do everything you want to do at whatever time you want to do it. But surrounding yourself with people who are champions of you, who are in your corner, and who are the people who will tell you when you're wrong, and who are the people who will tell you the right words when you need to hear them at just the right time. One of the things that I did a couple of years ago was I set up this kind of board of advisors for myself. So basically, I went to kind of 6 to 8 pals who work in different fields and just said to them, can you be a person that I go to if I have to make a decision, or if I'm stuck with something, or if I just need a bit of a pep talk? And they said, yeah. And I don't see them in person. I probably just WhatsApp them or text them. I'm like, hi, I'm struggling. What do you think I should do? Please give me your brain. And they do. And actually, that unit of support, that safety net in many ways, has made a huge difference, because we don't always agree, but actually that's more important than always being of the same opinion. But surrounding myself with those people has helped make everything better. And then I think the other thing is finding a moment in your day where you do something just for yourself. I go for a walk every morning at the same time, and it's a routine that I've really gotten into during the pandemic, and actually it has made all of the difference, because it is headspace just for me, and it's getting out into the fresh air, and it's what I need, and it might be what very different to what other people need. And I think, as trite as it might sound, the best advice I could give is like, be kind to yourself. And I know this notion of kindness is kind of spoken about a lot, and I don't think kindness always means niceness, but I think it means like constructive support, right? Like, I think there are so many people in the world who will tell disabled people the things that they cannot do, that we really don't need to hear it from ourselves. Like, we really need to be in a position where we think we are the best people in the world, because there is so much systemic barriers that will challenge that for us, that unless we have a confidence and a belief in ourselves, that is really difficult to construct, and it really takes time. And I have spent almost 3 decades constructing it. But I believe that I'm kind of great. And I think that that's okay to believe, because there are loads of people who probably don't think that I'm kind of great. And actually, I need to have a level of confidence in myself that can challenge all of that other noise around me. So surrounding yourself with people who will kind of amplify that confidence, and piece by piece finding ways to believe that you are good enough as you are, that you deserve to be happy, to be independent, to be financially secure, to be in a job that merits the skills that you can bring to the role, I think is a fair thing to ask disabled people to believe that they can do and be. And yeah, I think it's being kind to yourself. And every time that voice in your head tells you that you are terrible and you are not good enough, go, yeah, thanks, not listening to that today. Really appreciate those kind words, but you know what? I'm good. Yeah, I'm going to turn that off, until eventually your monologue inside your mind becomes one that is the supportive voice that you need in your head. That is my lecture on how disabled people should think about themselves. You are welcome. That was far too long.
That is brilliant advice. I think I need to take that. Like,
I am happy to be that voice in your head at any time. You can text me in your best and worst moments, and I'll just send you a voice note and be like, you're amazing. The kind of thing that I am. I just send voice notes all the time telling people.
Oh, yeah, no, I think like it is important, you know, you were saying about like, it's even more just acceptance of anything. Like, I feel like when I was in school, I was very like, no, I don't have a disability. Your dog. Yeah, so, and then like in college, I've been very more like, you know, I have a disability, you know, I'm owning it. I can't change it, and that's just who I am. And I feel like hopefully when I do get out into the world of work and stuff like that, like I will continue that attitude, and I'll be proud of who I am. And hopefully a lot of other people with disabilities will be the same.
I'm so sorry. The postwoman came to my door at the exact time, and my dog and the postwoman have a very conflicting relationship. My dog, like me, is a Jack Russell, which means she is very tiny but has a ferocious bark. Again, much like me. So my apologies about that. No, I think you're exactly right. And I think, you know, one of the questions that I sometimes get asked is like, do you wish you were non-disabled? Like what, like, do you wish that there was like a cure? Do you wish? And I think we have like lived in this world where those who are non-disabled expect us to want to be like them. They expect us to desire that. And actually I don't, because I would be an entirely different person, because my personality, my skills, my interests, my achievements, if you can call them achievements, have been shaped by being disabled, because I wouldn't be interested in any of the things that I am. I would be an entirely different Sinead Burke if I wasn't disabled. And I think it takes us time to like break out of that thinking and to like accept us as we are, and realizing that like I I don't want to be something else because I would be someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that takes real time. And I think it's as well realizing that there are so many companies and businesses and places that we can work, that we are often expected to settle for opportunities that may not be ones that make us feel proud of who we are because it's work. And I think that needs to change too. But it is a tough balance. And I think we also need to like, you know, validate the optional article and the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, so that we can complain when things are, and protest when things are not going our way. So there is lots of things that need to be solved and fixed. But on a personal level, I think we also need to like believe that we are great.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much, Sinead, for talking to me today.
This has been such a treat. Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to listen to your podcast. So please do let me know when I can like subscribe and chat about it on the internet. But thank you so much for your wonderful questions and for your time and
Thank you.
Our pod fell out.
Bye.